My name is Leila Navid, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just a memory. It's the beginning of something that has completely changed the way I see life. It was as if someone had taken the book of my story, written in permanent ink, and started erasing passages with invisible tears, to write something new, something I never imagined. I grew up in Shiraz, deep in the heart of Iran, where tradition isn't just tradition, it's sacred law. There, no one is simply born. We come with a mold, a shape, and mine was sculpted with prayers, veils, and silence. My family was deeply Muslim, and when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. Faith was the air we breathed. It was the way we saw the world, how we spoke, how we thought, and even how we dreamed. My father, oh my father, a serious man, the kind everyone in the neighborhood respected or feared. He knew the Quran like someone who memorized their very bones. He recited the verses with such intensity it seemed they were tattooed on his soul. As for my mother, she was silence personified. Always delicate, but with that firm faith that doesn't shout. It just remains. It was common to see her in the corner of the living room, her eyes almost closed, murmuring prayers as her fingers glided over the beads of the tasbih. The sound was soft but constant, as if each bead said, "Remain, obey, do not question." And I obeyed, because questioning, well, that simply didn't exist. It was unthinkable. From a young age, I was taught to pray 5 times a day, memorize the sacred verses, and conform to the path that every generation before me had already walked. I believed that was it, that this was the only possible reality. Islam wasn't a choice, it was who I was, like the blood that runs through our veins, which no one sees, but everyone needs to live. Until something small, almost insignificant at first glance, began to crack this perfect, closed world. My father decided to send me to a private school. So far, so good. But it was an Armenian school. Yes, Armenian. It may seem like a small detail, but it became a milestone. He didn't do it out of religious affinity, of course not. He did it because the school had a reputation for excellence, and he wanted me to have a solid, prestigious education. But perhaps he didn't realize that this small detour in the path he planned for me would end up opening a portal. A portal that, at first, was just a crack, but that, over time, would transform into something that would change everything. At first, I confess, I felt out of place. After all, many of the students were Christians. That bothered me. It made me tense. I expected rejection, dirty looks, and even a certain kind of danger. Contrary to what I imagined, that Christian environment didn't welcome me coldly, but with such natural kindness that it made me feel awkward. I expected rejection, or at least suspicious looks. But what I found was the opposite. A warm, sincere welcome. To this day, I vividly remember my first day at that school. I entered the room with cautious steps, trying to appear confident, even though inside my heart was racing. At the back of the room, a group of girls chatted and laughed as if the outside world didn't even exist. One of them, named Noreen, looked at me and smiled. That smile, it was like a gentle breeze on a sweltering day. She wore a necklace with a small cross, which swung gently across her chest as she spoke. I couldn't help it. My eyes were fixed on that symbol. She noticed and, as naturally as possible, asked, "Are you Muslim?" I nodded, a little defensive, confused about what would come next. But she just said, "I'm glad you're here," and kept smiling. That simplicity took me apart. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to that kind of lightness, but it kept hammering at me. Over time, I began to notice something different about that group of girls. When they spoke of God, there was tenderness, not fear. And when they spoke of Jesus, it was as if they were talking about someone who was part of their everyday lives. He wasn't a distant, sacred, and untouchable figure. He was someone present, intimate. It was strange at first, but intriguing too. I never saw any of them trying to convince me of anything. They didn't recite vast passages from sacred books, nor did they try to prove themselves right. They simply lived what they believed, with a serene, almost silent joy. I remember one day, during recess, I saw some of them sitting in a circle in the courtyard. Holding hands, eyes closed, they were praying. But it was a prayer unlike anything I'd ever known. Without rigidity, without imposition. The words were gentle, full of gratitude, as if they were speaking to someone they loved dearly. That struck me deeply. I didn't say anything, but inside me, a question began to echo. What if there's something more? What if? The months passed, and this what if grew inside me like embers hidden beneath the ashes. I began to pay closer attention when they spoke of Jesus. To me, until then, he was just another prophet, like Isa in Islam. A good man, sure, but human. But on the lips of Noreen and the others, he seemed to be something much more. One day, overcome by curiosity, I asked why Christians use the cross as a symbol. Noreen looked me in the eye and replied with the same sweetness as always. To remember what Jesus did for us. He died on the cross to save us from our sins, because he loves us. These words left me stunned. To love to the point of dying for someone, for myself, it was a completely foreign concept to me. In Islam, we always hear about submission, obedience, reverent fear. But love like this, a love that surrenders, it shook me in a silent, profound way. It was in a literature class that the unexpected happened. The teacher challenged us to choose an important historical work for a project. I had no idea that this simple homework assignment would open such a big door in my life. In the old school library, those narrow shelves, the smell of aged paper in the air, I wandered aimlessly, fingering the books, half distracted. Then my eyes fell on a worn cover, almost hidden in the corner. I picked up the book. It was a Bible. Yes, a real Bible. Not a quote, not a reference. The very book I'd always heard was forbidden, dangerous, and inappropriate. It felt dangerous. Not just because it was forbidden, but because something inside me screamed that if I crossed that line, nothing would ever be the same again. My heart was beating so fast I could almost hear it. I looked around, as if at any moment someone would appear and snatch that book from my hands. Even so, I reached out with fear, as if that cover might burn me. But I touched it. My hands trembled as I pulled the Bible from the shelf. Opening that book was like crossing an invisible boundary. And deep down, I knew that was it. The pages were thin, delicate, as if carrying something that didn't want to be revealed easily. I leafed through them cautiously, trying to convince myself that it was just academic curiosity, just schoolwork, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But then my eyes stopped on one sentence. It was as if she had been waiting for me there. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Those words, they shone before me as if they had life. For a few seconds, everything around me disappeared. It was as if the book itself had called my name. Simple, yet so profound, so direct, that something inside me trembled. I felt seen, completely exposed, as if someone finally knew exactly what was hidden inside me. I slammed the book shut, almost frightened by what I'd felt. I hurriedly put it back on the shelf, as if to erase that moment. But it was too late. The words had already clung to my soul like seeds carried by the wind, waiting only for the right time to bloom. At home, everything continued as usual. My father remained firm, demanding, expecting me to be the perfect daughter. He wanted me to get good grades, uphold the family name, and one day marry someone he approved of, someone of our faith, our traditions. He always repeated, "You are the mirror of our home. Never forget who you are or where you came from." And I nodded, as always. But inside, something was different. A new tension began to build. The words I'd read in that Bible still echoed within me, and with them, a weariness I'd never recognized, a weight, and a question I didn't yet know how to formulate. But it was there, pulsing. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my mother. Despite her kindness, I knew any questions would be met with concern, maybe even reprimand. So I kept quiet, but I began to observe more closely. And the more I saw how the Christians around me lived, the more something inside me stirred. They didn't pretend to be perfect. They weren't afraid to show their pain. Their faith walked hand in hand with their wounds. It wasn't something worn as a mask. It was something real. This messed with me. By the time I finished high school, I was no longer the same teenager I'd been before. I still didn't fully understand what Christians believed, but something inside me had already changed. I still didn't truly understand the Christian faith, but I began to admire those who lived it sincerely. The way those people spoke of God with love and walked with such peace, it touched me. They had a quiet courage, you know? To live what they believed in a country where it could cost everything. And yet, they remained steadfast. But when it came time to go to college, I buried those thoughts. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that everything would go back to normal once I moved to another city. But deep down, I already knew. My story was just beginning. The new city wasn't as bustling as Shiraz, but it had something different. A mix of tradition and resilience, like a flame that refuses to go out. The streets were narrow, filled with vendors shouting their wares, the scent of saffron and cumin in the air, and the markets bustling with life. But it was inside the university campus that I felt something truly new. For the first time, I was away from my father's watchful eyes, away from the whispers of my neighbors, away from the pressure of representing an identity that no longer made sense to me. It was there that I experienced a quiet freedom. It wasn't blatant, but it was in the air. I saw women walking around without veils, men reading books considered forbidden, and even rumors of secret meetings where people prayed freely, even at the risk of arrest. It was as if there existed an undercurrent of faith, a search for truth that escaped the eyes of the authorities. And it was precisely in this fertile and dangerous soil that my thirst for answers found room to grow. During the second week of classes, while I was organizing my notebooks in the library, I heard whispers coming from a nearby table. 3 students were gathered together, speaking softly. I tried not to pay attention, but it was no use. I clearly heard one of them mention the name of Jesus. My heart raced. I pretended to concentrate on my notes, but I just stood there, listening with my heart in my throat. They didn't speak as if they were studying a historical figure. They spoke as if they were describing someone close to them, as if he were real. At the end of that day, I recognized one of the people in the group. Her name was Sarah. She was in my philosophy class. She had a light, confident demeanor, and that rare smile that truly conveys peace. When class ended, she came up to me, as if she'd known me for years. "Hey, Leila," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Would you like to have some tea with me? I wanted to talk a little about today's class." I hesitated. There was still something inside me that trembled with fear. But there was also a curiosity that grew with each passing day. And there was something about her, about that calm, that made me say yes. "Sure," I replied, trying to sound calm. We went to a small cafe on the outskirts of the university. The place was cozy, lit with yellow lights, smelling of fresh bread and mint. And the conversation flowed effortlessly. She asked me about my childhood in Shiraz, about my family, how I was adjusting to university life. And without realizing it, I said more than I should have. I also asked about her life. And it was between sips of tea and shy laughs that she surprised me. We were there, in that calm corner, surrounded by the sweet aroma of rose tea, when Sarah said, as if commenting on the weather, "My family is Christian." She spoke so naturally, as if it couldn't change everything, as if in that country it wasn't dangerous information. I tried to hide my shock, but my eyes must have spoken for me. "Ah," I murmured, trying to sound neutral. She smiled, the smile of someone who's understood this reaction hundreds of times. "I know it's not common here," she said calmly. "We have to be careful. But I've never been ashamed of who I am. I think what you said is beautiful. I've never been ashamed of who I am." Sarah's words stayed with me for days. Simple, yet powerful. They were courageous and yet sweet. A firmness so light it entered without asking permission and stirred everything inside. Because, to be honest, I never knew what it was like. To live without shame, without carrying doubts, without hiding questions inside my heart. That touched me more than I wanted to admit. A few weeks later, we were sitting under a tree on campus. It was a golden afternoon, the kind where even silence seems to smell peaceful. That's when she looked at me with that serene smile and said, "Some friends and I are getting together this week. We'll talk about life, read some texts, and pray together too. You're more than welcome." She didn't say outright that it was a Christian meeting, but she didn't need to. I understood right away. My first impulse was to refuse. I thought, what if someone finds out? What if this gets back to my father? But that old curiosity, the same one that had been born in a library when I first leafed through the Bible, burned like a rekindled ember. Against all logic, I said yes. On the night of the meeting, I walked to the edge of town, to the simple house Sarah had described. From the outside, it looked like any other modest home, but inside, it hid something I had never seen before. The group met in the basement. When I went downstairs, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like the whole neighborhood could hear it. It was as if I were breaking a sacred law. And in a way, I was. It was a hidden world, a forbidden world, and I was about to enter it. Inside, there must have been 15 people. They sat in a circle on the floor, some with Bibles in their hands, others with their eyes closed in silence. The atmosphere was calm and welcoming. Even with fear lingering within me, I felt something immediately enveloping me. No one looked at me suspiciously. No one questioned me. No one tried to convert me. Sarah simply introduced me casually. And the group leader, a man named Daniel, began to speak. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight, a presence. He spoke of love, forgiveness, hope, not as distant ideas, but as lived realities. He told stories from the Bible with such passion, such clarity, that it felt as if the characters were right there with us. Then they sang some hymns, soft, simple, but charged with emotion. They weren't songs meant to entertain. They were sung prayers. And somehow, those words penetrated my defenses. I felt a peace there, in that hidden room, that I had never felt in any mosque. A peace that didn't scream, but enveloped me completely. And these people, they were risking everything for their faith. And yet, they were there, steadfast, joyful, at peace. At the end of the meeting, Daniel came up to me. His gaze was firm but gentle. He extended his hand and handed me a small book, a pocket Bible. "Take it with you," he said. "You don't have to read it now, but if you ever want to, it's yours." I looked at the little book in his hands, hesitated, and then accepted it. He smiled slightly, as if he understood everything without needing to say anything else. I left that house clutching the Bible to my chest. It was as if I were carrying something both precious and dangerous. Part of me wanted to protect it. Another wanted to hide it. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My head was spinning. I picked up the book, turned on the lamp, and with trembling hands, began to leaf through it. I opened it to any page, and it was as if those words had been written directly to me. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. No one comes to the Father except through me." Those words echoed within me. How could anyone say something like that? In my original faith, all prophets were respected, but none placed themselves above the others. This was new, bold. It was as if Jesus wasn't just a messenger. He was the message itself. Over the next few weeks, I continued attending meetings. Each meeting felt like a breath of life, but also a growing weight on my heart. I began asking questions, lots of questions. I asked Sarah, Daniel, who was Jesus really? What did it mean to follow him? What was salvation? And they never rushed me, never pressured me. They always listened to me with affection, with respect, as if they understood that faith isn't imposed. It's shared. One day, I couldn't help but blurt out the question that had been haunting me. Why do you risk so much? Do you have any idea what could happen if you were discovered? Daniel looked at me with a calm but firm expression and replied, "Because it's true, Leila. When you experience the love of Jesus, you simply can't live the same way anymore. He gives us courage, even when everything around us tries to silence us." Those words shattered me. I knew he spoke with real knowledge, with the pain of someone who has lost so much by believing. And yet, he was there, whole, at peace. The more time I spent with them, the more torn I felt. My heart was drawn to that vibrant faith, but my mind was a field of fear. What would my parents say? What would my father do if he found out? What about me? What would become of me? One night, sitting in my room with my pocket Bible in hand, I prayed a prayer unlike any other. Nothing memorized, nothing rehearsed. It was simple, honest, painful. God, if you're real, if Jesus is really who they say he is, show me. I just want to know the truth. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't imagine a light in the sky or an audible voice. But in that silent darkness, I felt something. A breath, a presence, a peace. As if, for the first time, someone were truly listening to me. What I didn't know was that the path ahead would begin to narrow, and that the next steps would be the most difficult of my life. On the outside, everything was the same. Classes, laughter, weekly phone calls home. But inside, a storm was brewing. The words of the Bible, the calm conversations, the gentle hymns, the way Christians lived. All of this pulled me toward a new path, as if a small but insistent light were trying to pull me out of an ancient darkness. But there was something holding me tightly. Fear. Fear of my family. Fear of culture. Fear of breaking with everything I'd ever known. It was like living between two worlds. On one side, the old life, rules, honor, silence. On the other, a new world, where God was near, where there was forgiveness, freedom, and a peace I could no longer ignore. I remember one afternoon in particular. We had just left the meeting in the basement. As I was saying goodbye to Sarah at the door, I saw a man leaning on the corner. Plain clothes, nothing special. But there was something in that look. There was something strange about the way that man looked at me. He was too direct, too cold. My stomach churned. I walked past him quickly, head down, pretending to be distracted. The next day, Daniel gathered the group together and spoke quietly but firmly. We need to be more careful. They're watching the area. A brother was arrested last week for attending meetings like ours. The words hit like ice water. I knew the risks, of course, but hearing it said out loud made it all more real. The fear stopped being an idea. It became a lurking shadow, ready to knock on the door. Later, Sarah pulled me aside and said gently, "If you want to stop coming, I'll understand." I nodded, trying to sound firm. "I'm not scared," I lied, but inside, I trembled. A few days later, I received a call from my father. His voice filled my room with a heavy silence. "Leila, how are your studies?" "They're going well, Baba," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. He continued, serious as ever. "What about the prayers? Have you been faithful?" I hesitated for a second. "Yes, Baba." Another lie. The truth? I couldn't pray like I used to. Traditional words sounded hollow, distant. It was as if I were speaking to someone who no longer heard me. Instead, my mind returned to the spontaneous prayers of the meetings. Sincere. Living. I never imagined it was possible to speak to God like that. But it had transformed me. When I hung up, his words kept ringing in my head. Don't forget who you are. But the truth? I no longer knew who I was. That week, I opened my pocket Bible again. Not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. I was suffocating. I began reading the Gospel of John, and a sentence pierced me like light piercing the darkness. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I fell apart inside. I wanted this light. I longed for it. But how could I accept it without erasing everything I knew? How could I embrace this faith without giving up my world? That night, I had a dream I'll never forget. I was walking alone through a long, narrow, dark tunnel. Fear was like a heavy veil covering me. I couldn't see the end. I couldn't see a way out. Suddenly, a figure appeared. He carried a small lamp. His face was calm. His eyes seemed to pierce my soul. He didn't shout. He didn't command. He simply said softly, "Come with me." I woke up with my face wet with tears. I knew. It was Jesus. The next day, I told Daniel everything. He listened quietly, attentively. Finally, he smiled, his eyes shining. "It's a sign. Jesus is calling you, Leila." My voice cracked as I replied, "What if I lose everything?" He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to take the first step." But taking that step, it was like jumping off a cliff into the dark. I didn't know if there would be ground on the other side. Still, something inside me said, "Go." A week later, everything fell apart. It was night. We had just finished another meeting. I was hugging Sarah goodbye when I saw him again. The same man from the corner, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 others had come with him, and the 3 of them walked toward me with determined steps. My body froze. They stopped me right in the middle of the street. "Where were you?" The man's voice was harsh, full of accusation. "At a friend's house," I lied, trying to sound calm, but my voice was shaking. They didn't believe me. One of them snatched my bag from my shoulder and began rummaging through everything. It all happened so quickly, until he found it, the small pocket Bible. He raised it as if he'd found a weapon. "You think you can bring that filth into our country?" he said with contempt in his eyes. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body froze. Fear paralyzed me. I was taken to a dark, cramped, windowless room. There the interrogation began. Hours and hours. The same questions repeated, one after the other. Who else goes to the meetings? Where are they held? How long have you been attending? I remained silent. I didn't answer. I couldn't. That darkness left marks on me that are still difficult to explain. When they realized my silence bothered them, the threats began. Cruel, cold and direct, aimed at destroying not only the body but the soul. Do you know what happens to traitors like you? One of them growled, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. Your family will reject you. You'll rot alone in a prison. The words were like razors. I cried, uncontrollably, but I remained silent. Not out of courage, but out of a deep certainty I can't even explain. I just knew I couldn't betray those people. That faith, that seed that even small, was already a part of me. After many hours, they let me go. But before they did, one of them looked at me and said with a cynical smile, "We'll keep an eye on you. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." I left with shaky legs and a reeling mind. When I reached the dormitory, the weight of everything fell upon me at once. I locked the door and collapsed to the floor. It was as if the world were collapsing. My muscles trembled. My mind swirled in a whirlwind of fear and panic. I had never felt such terror in my life. Hours later, in the early hours of the morning, Sarah and Daniel appeared. I didn't even need to speak. Sarah knelt beside me, held my hand, and whispered, "You're braver than you think." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "I don't feel brave." Daniel looked at me with seriousness and tenderness. "That's the price of following Jesus, Leila. But he is with you. Always." I lay awake all night, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the Bible on the table. Daniel's words echoed. He is with you. But what if I can't handle it? What if I lose everything? It was there, in that silence that tore at my core, that I made a decision. I could no longer live divided, trying to please everyone and slowly losing myself. I knelt, for the first time, without the fear of being watched, without memorized words, just me and God. "Jesus," I whispered, my heart pounding, "if you are truly who you say you are, I give you my life. I can't do this alone anymore. Help me, please." It wasn't a pretty prayer. It wasn't memorized, but it was real. It was my raw soul, poured out before him. And in that moment, something happened. I didn't hear voices. I didn't see lights. But I felt it. A peace so deep enveloped me, it felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. As if someone embraced me from within and said, "Now you're not alone anymore." But along with this peace, I knew that this was just the beginning. The path from there on would be even more difficult. The days after my arrest were a mixture of tension and silence. Every step I took felt watched. Every phone call, every turn around the corner, every movement, everything felt risky. My heart was racing. My eyes were always alert, as if a trap would spring at any moment. Still, I couldn't pull away. Something stronger than fear kept pulling me back. Jesus had touched my heart, and no threat, no surveillance, no terror could erase that. One night, I followed my routine and called home. My mother's voice sounded as sweet as ever, but there were pauses, silences that felt like shouting, until she said, "Leila, your father wants to talk to you." My blood ran cold. He almost never interrupted a call. He only did so when something serious was happening. "Leila," he said in that heavy voice that filled everything around him. "What's this I'm hearing about you hanging out with Christians?" I froze. A shiver ran down my spine. How did he know? Did someone tell him? Did the police notify me? I tried to hide it. I don't know what you're talking about, Baba." "Don't lie to me," he shouted. His voice cracked with anger. "We raised you to honor our faith, our family. Do you want to shame us?" "I'm not doing anything wrong," I replied softly, tears streaming down my face. "Stay away from these people," he ordered. "Do you understand me? Stay away, or don't even bother coming home." The line fell silent. Just the sound of the phone in the background, and the weight of my heart beating like a broken drum. I stood there, motionless. His words echoed inside me like knives. Or don't even bother coming home. My family meant everything to me. My father's approval, my mother's affection as she combed my hair, my brother's laughter on Saturday afternoons. Every memory was a part of who I was. The thought of losing them was like losing pieces of my soul. That night, I cried until I had no strength left. My body trembled. My mind felt empty. But in the midst of the pain, something happened. A gentle peace covered me like dew on a dark dawn. It was as if a presence were beside me, invisible but real, as if whispering, "I am with you." The following weeks were marked by fear, but also by faith. And my faith grew, even in the silence, even in the tension. One day, after another of those discreet encounters, Daniel approached me. His face was calm, but his eyes held a different light, a restrained glow, almost as if holding back a sacred joy. "Leila," he said quietly, "some of us are going to perform a baptism next week. It's risky, but if you feel ready, it's an important step." He didn't insist. He just held out his hand. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. A baptism, a step of no return, a total surrender. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a rupture, a new beginning. It was like saying, "From now on, I am his." My heart raced. A pure, almost childlike joy filled me. But at the same time, fear tightened my chest. What if I can't handle it? Accepting baptism wasn't just a spiritual gesture. It was, in my context, a silent cry of rebellion against everything. The government, the culture, my own family. It was like breaking chains with my own hands, and then leaving myself vulnerable, exposed. I needed time. "I need to think," I murmured to Daniel, my voice trembling. He simply nodded with an understanding look, as if he already knew that decisions like these aren't made impulsively. Those were days of internal agony. I walked the streets as if floating, with empty eyes and a burning heart. I knew baptism wasn't just a rite. It was a declaration to the world that I now belonged to Jesus. And after that, there would be no turning back. When the day finally arrived, I woke early. My body trembled, but inside there was a strange calm, a firmness that didn't come from me. Daniel had chosen a hidden spot, far from the city, a stream surrounded by tall trees and an almost sacred silence. The tension was visible on their faces. Everyone there knew the risk, but there was also hope, faith. We gathered in a circle, and Daniel explained in a low, steady voice, "Baptism is the burial of the old life and the birth of a new one in Christ." Behind him, the water flowed quietly, as if it too could hear. One by one, they entered the stream. When it was my turn, my legs gave way. Daniel looked me in the eye and asked, "Are you ready?" I nodded, barely audible. And when he plunged me into the icy waters, something extraordinary happened. It felt like the weight of everything, the fear, the guilt, the shame, was being lifted from me. It was more than a dive. It was as if my soul was being washed clean. As I emerged, I felt the sun touch my face. The tears flowed freely, but not from pain. They were tears of relief, of rebirth. For the first time, I knew I belonged to him. But that intense joy didn't last long. A few days later, coming home from college, I found a folded piece of paper pushed under my bedroom door. My hands began to tremble just touching it. I opened it. It was written in rough letters. "We know what you did. There will be consequences." Simple, direct, but laden with menace. My heart raced. I looked around the hallway. Empty. But the silence screamed. They had seen me. That same night, the phone rang. The number was familiar. My brother. I answered hesitantly. His voice, once so welcoming, now sounded cold and hard. "Leila, you think we don't know? That we can hide this from us?" I tried to answer, but my throat closed. "Hide what?" I whispered, even though I knew exactly what he meant. "Don't play innocent," he shouted. "You've dishonored our family. Baba is beside herself. Mom won't stop crying. How could you dare?" I didn't do anything wrong," he said, crying. "You betrayed us," he yelled again. "You're no longer part of this family." And he hung up. I stood there, motionless, the phone still in my hand. The words echoed inside me like a funeral bell. "You are no longer part of the family." In the days that followed, I could barely eat or sleep. The pain of losing my family, my parents, my siblings, my history, torn through me. It was as if a whole part of me had been ripped away. I loved them. With all my heart. Every childhood memory. Every meal around the table. Every laugh. Now felt like ghosts mocking my emptiness. But in the midst of the darkness, Jesus' words came back to me. The ones I read and have never left me. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I still didn't fully grasp the weight of those words. But in that moment, they gave me a breath of hope. If losing everything meant finding him, maybe it was worth it. Sarah and Daniel didn't let me fall apart. They became more than friends. They were soulmates. Sarah hugged me whenever I cried and whispered tenderly, "You're not alone, Leila. We're your family now." They were simple words, but filled with love. It was in them that I found the strength to carry on. It was in that small group of hidden Christians that I discovered a kind of love that doesn't demand performance, that doesn't measure you by appearances. They accepted me with my wounds, my doubts, and my fears. And it was there, amid sighs and quiet prayers, that God began to rebuild me from within. Days later, I was sitting with Daniel in that same cafe where so many conversations had transformed my life. He looked at me gently and said something that still resonates with me today. "Leila, your story has power. God can use it to reach others who, like you, are seeking the truth." I remained silent. The very thought of sharing everything, my pain, my abandonment, my faith, terrified me. But something inside me knew. I couldn't hide what Jesus had done. He gave me life. And life isn't something we hide. In the following days, the tension only increased. Living my faith in Iran was like walking through a minefield. Every prayer, every meeting, every sidelong glance could mean the end. But my baptism wasn't just water on my skin. It was a seal on my soul. And I knew there was no turning back. One afternoon, leaving a prayer meeting, I saw a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance. Quiet, but alert. As I drew closer, the face emerged from the gloom. My heart sank. It was Daria, a fellow university student. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and shock. "Leila, what are you doing here?" Her voice cut through the air like a knife. Time seemed to freeze. Daria was always critical and mocking, especially when it came to Christianity. She thought this faith was weak, foreign, and a disgrace to our culture. Seeing her there, standing in the doorway, my blood ran cold. "That's none of your business," I replied, more firmly than I thought I would. She smiled sideways, a crooked, menacing smile. "Oh, but it is. Do you think no one noticed your secret little life? You've changed. And I know why." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm tightly. "I could report you, you know. It would be easy." I yanked my arm away and walked quickly away, never looking back. But her words echoed for days, like distant thunder. How much did she know, and what would she do with that information? A week later, we were gathered silently in the small apartment of a new convert. It was a night like any other, except that Sarah and Daniel were not present. At the time, this detail seemed insignificant. Later, I understood it was divine providence. We were in prayer, whispering praises, when 3 sharp knocks shook the door. "Open! Police!" The world stopped. Ibrahim, one of the brothers, signaled for us to remain calm, but his look screamed panic. He walked to the door, and before he could unlock it completely, it was broken down. Armed men, uniformed in black, stormed the apartment as if hunting dangerous criminals. They shouted orders, kicked chairs, and knocked over furniture. It was as if they were dismantling faith with their own boots. "Identification, now!" one of them shouted, his eyes blazing. "Show your identification!" one of the officers shouted, while another opened a backpack and spread out its contents. Bibles, prayer books, and pamphlets with verses. The officer's gaze darkened. "You're all under arrest," he said firmly. The icy handcuffs closed around my wrists with the sound of a prison locking from within. The ride to the detention center was silent. Each person was immersed in their own fear, yet still praying silently. Upon arrival, we were separated. I was placed in a damp, dimly lit room. Across the table, a man with a cold stare opened a folder. Leila Navid, 22 years old, a girl from a traditional Muslim family. "What happened to you?" "Nothing happened," I murmured. He slammed his fist on the table. "Don't lie to me." I took a deep breath. You got involved with Christians, attended illegal meetings? Do you realize what that means? I remained silent. He stepped closer. Do you know what they do to people like you? Do you think your family will protect you? They've already turned their backs on you. Each word was like a blow, but something inside me resisted. You're destroying yourself because of lies. Jesus can't save you, but if you cooperate, we can free you. I closed my eyes. Tears welled, but my voice didn't tremble. Jesus already saved me. The man nodded. 2 guards entered and dragged me from the chair. Take her. The cell was small, dirty, and smelled of fear. 3 other women were there. One of them, with gray hair, looked at me tenderly and held out part of the blanket. Why are you here? By faith, I whispered. She nodded. You're not alone. God is with you, even here. Those words whispered in the darkness were like light in the middle of the tunnel. The days in prison were hard. Interrogations, threats, constant pressure. But I refused to give up the names of my brothers in faith. I had already lost one family. I wouldn't lose another. After almost 3 weeks, I was taken to court. My legs trembled, but my heart remained firm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I knew I would not receive a fair trial. My faith was considered treason, apostasy, a crime against the state. I had heard of Christians who disappeared without a trace. Was I one of them? The courtroom was cold and austere. A man in a black robe regarded me with contempt. Leila Navid. You are accused of abandoning Islam, participating in prohibited cults, and spreading the Christian faith among Iranian citizens. How do you plead? I took a deep breath. I could lie, deny everything and get out alive. But that would be just surviving, not living. I'm guilty, I replied. I'm a Christian, and nothing will change that. The air grew heavy. My parents were in the front row. My father, his gaze hard. My mother, her head down, her hands trembling in her lap. I tried to meet her eyes. She looked away, as if facing the truth was too much. The judge entered, his expression icy. The prosecutor was blunt. She abandoned Islam. She shamed her faith and her family by converting to Christianity. That's a crime. I remained silent. Inside, I prayed, Lord, stay with me. When it was my turn to speak, my hands were cold. My voice was hesitant at first. But something enveloped me, a peace that didn't come from within. I haven't abandoned my faith, I said. I've found it. A murmur ran through the room. The judge frowned. Jesus changed my life. He brought peace where there was only pain. I'm not against anyone, but I also can't deny who he is to me. I am not against Islam, nor against my family. I simply followed the truth I found within my heart. The judge banged his gavel hard. This court is not here for philosophies. His voice was iron. You will face the consequences of your choices. The sentence fell like a stone. 5 years in prison for apostasy and spreading forbidden doctrines. My heart sank, but my faith remained. I remembered Jesus' words, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. That was my cross. As I was escorted out of the courtroom, my father stood and walked toward me. He looked me in the eyes as if I were a stranger. You destroyed this family, he said coldly. I no longer have a daughter. The words pierced my soul like knives. I turned to my mother, searching for a gesture, a look of tenderness. But all I saw was pain and silence. Prison was everything I feared. Dark, damp, full of hostile stares. The guards were cruel. The other inmates avoided me, calling me an infidel, a traitor, and cursed. But even there, in the deepest valley, Jesus was with me. In the early morning hours, when silence reigned, I prayed quietly. Christ's presence was like a gentle fire, warming my spirit. At times, I even felt like I heard his voice telling me, "You are not alone." One day, a guard called me over. "You have a visitor." I was led into a small room lit by a dim bulb. When I entered, I saw a face in the mirror. He was thinner, but his eyes shone. "Leila," he said gently, "we pray for you every day. God is with you." Those words were like cool water to a thirsty soul. The months dragged on. 3, then 4. The interrogations continued, but I didn't give in. I didn't deny my faith. I didn't betray anyone. I preferred prison to betrayal. Until one day, without warning, a guard opened the cell. "Gather your things. You're being released." My eyes widened. What? You heard me. Don't make me repeat myself. Still not understanding, I was led to the prison gates. Outside, under the clear sky and bright sun, stood Daniel and Sarah. Their smiles shone brighter than the daylight. "We don't know how," Daniel said, his eyes brimming with tears. But God opened a door. When I stepped outside those walls, I felt the sun embrace me. Freedom had a scent I'll never forget. Hope. But I knew it was no ordinary freedom. My name was tarnished. My family had rejected me, and I could never go back to my old life. Sarah took my hands. "Leila, God has plans for you." I just nodded. I didn't know what they were. I just knew that from then on, my path was with Christ. As uncertain as it was safe, because He would be with me. The Christian community welcomed me back as a sister who had lost her way, and that's exactly how I felt. Someone who had walked through dark valleys, faced abandonment, fear, imprisonment, and survived. They hid me in a safe house, away from the eyes of the authorities. Peace was fragile. Fear still lurked like a silent shadow. But within us lay a certainty that no human power could erase. We belonged to Christ. I spent those days immersed in prayer, reading the Word, absorbing verses that once seemed distant, but now burned alive within me. I also began to share my testimony. And each time I shared it, the pain of the past bled a little less, and my faith blossomed a little more. Over time, I realized my suffering hadn't been in vain. It was part of a greater plan. God was using my scars to reach wounds I didn't even know existed. It was then that Daniel approached me with a proposal that took my breath away. "Leila, you've been through so much. Your faith has withstood imprisonment, rejection, and threats. I think it's time for your story to reach beyond these walls." Fear washed over me like a cold wave. Speak in public? Put myself out there again? Be bold once more? The thought made me tremble, but I took it to prayer. And in the silence, I heard something that turned me inside out. If you keep quiet, who will speak for them? With the help of Daniel and Leah, I began sharing my testimony in secret meetings. At first, it was just a small group. Weary faces, thirsty hearts, looks that carried the same hunger that once screamed within me. But God moves hearts like the wind moves leaves. The news spread, the meetings grew. My story was told, retold, translated, and spread through underground networks. And it wasn't about me anymore. It was about Him. Grace is stronger than fear. And then the call came. I had to leave. Leaving Iran was one of the most painful decisions of my life. It was where I was born. It was where I grew up. It was where I spent my childhood. It was where my family still breathed. But it was also where my freedom was shackled. I knew that if I continued, I would put everyone around me at risk. With the help of the Christian community, I fled to a neighboring country. And there, I experienced for the first time the freedom I had prayed for. I began writing anonymously for safety. I shared my story with Christian organizations. I recorded short videos. I wrote articles. I participated in secret video meetings. It was strange to see my story emerge from anonymity and reach the world. But it was also a miracle. Even living in freedom, my heart still beat for Iran. I prayed every day for my family. I didn't blame them. I just asked God to touch their hearts, as He touched mine, until one day, I received a message through a trusted contact. It was from my mother. "Leila, I miss you. Your father doesn't know I'm writing, but I still love you." My mother's words spilled from my eyes like tears. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a crack. And sometimes all God needs is a crack to let the light in. I wrote back. I spoke of my love for her. I spoke of Jesus. Today, I live in freedom, but I bear the marks of imprisonment, rejection, and exile. Not as scars of pain, but as signs of grace. That faith that was born hidden, today blossoms before the eyes of many. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I know in whom my future lies. My mission now is clear: to be a voice for the persecuted, a beacon for those who doubt, a living testimony that Jesus still saves, still heals, still transforms. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's this: redemption is always possible. God's grace never fails. And even in the darkest cell, there's light for those who look up. I end with the words that lit my heart on that lonely night. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This rest I have found, and now I offer it to the world. This is my story. This is God's grace. And this is the truth worth living for, and if need be, dying for.